Hello, I read 16 books in the month of August and I'm here to talk to you about them. Here's 15 of them. Unfortunately, 7 of these books I've already talked about. I read them for other videos that have already been posted. So we're kind of going to be doubling up a little bit, but I won't go into as much detail about those books as I already have. First up is The Bell Jar. I read this book when I was reading classics and it was okay. It's fine. It was nice to read this while reading classics because it's very, very readable. I breezed through this. It was super, super easy. I thought it was kind of shallow, though. This is about a mentally ill woman and in the 1950s or 60s, and it's kind of how she is treated. She gets electroshock therapy, she's institutionalized, whatever. She's like one of the most insufferably annoying and mean characters of all time, so I just couldn't empathize with her. This book is also xenophobic in every way. Every single way. I've already said this. It's racist, it's ableist, it's homophobic, it's everything. This deals with the treatment of women who are mentally ill in the mid 20th century. It's just not a unique perspective. It was at the time, it's not now. I just think that you can find things that are more interesting with better characters and less overt racism than The Bell Jar. After that, I read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and I fucking loved it. This is amazing. This is one of my favorite books I've ever read. It's like a little bit slow and like a little bit dense, but not anything that ruins the book. Not anything that should turn you away from it. I was so excited to pick this up every single time, and the prose is incredible. It's some of the best writing that has ever existed, that's ever been written. It's about loneliness and consciousness and existing in the world, and it's a gay allegory, and it's everything that I wanted it to be and more. And if you haven't read it, you just should. Do you like my mug? There's something wrong with it where if you put it in the microwave, it gets hotter than the tea inside. Next up is The Bluest by Toni Morrison. This is the 3rd Toni Morrison book that I've read, and she doesn't miss. She's so good at what she does. That's what everybody says, and they're all right about it. I fucking love Toni Morrison. The Bluest Eye is about a young black girl who wants to have blue eyes. That's kind of like the tagline of the story. It's a lot more than that. This is not ever told from the perspective of this girl. It's told through the people around her, and it will often go really in detail about the past of these people, the past that has in some ways has nothing to do with her, but of course affects her. And so it's so complex and it's nuanced and it's really whole. You get the whole entire picture of her life. It's about beauty and desire and beauty standards and the effect these beauty standards have specifically on black women who have historically been very much excluded from those beauty standards. The writing is amazing. This is really, really heavy and deals with really distressing topics. So it was a little bit hard to pick up sometimes, even though as soon as I picked it up, I just wanted to keep reading it. I knew it was going to hurt and did hurt. So be careful with this. Okay, we're done with the classics. After that, I read If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English. And I have such complex and polarizing thoughts on this. If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English is about a couple. One of them is a woman whose family comes from Egypt, but she's grown up in America, and she moves back to Egypt to connect with her history and past. And the man of the couple is from Egypt and has always lived there. And they meet and they enter into a relationship, and it becomes very abusive. Both of these characters are unnamed, so they become where they're from. It alternates perspective between each chapter, and so when it's the man's perspective, he identifies her as the American girl, and she identifies him as the Egyptian boy, which makes a lot of sense and really works for what the story is saying about heritage and place and what a country owes to you or what you owe to it. So this is told in 3 parts. Some of my main issues are with the first part, which it's trying to play with structure, and I just think it's doing it in a sort of shallow way. And so there's parts that I really viscerally fucking hate, and then there's parts that I really love. I love the story, I love the storytelling, I love the writing, but at the top of almost every page is this thing, question. Can you see that? Can you see it? Why are you talking? Yesterday he burrowed in the pillows, and now I've made the bed so he can't do it again, and he's really pissed off. He's trying to find the spot. So each short chapter is headed with a question, and the questions I found to be really fake deep. It felt like some 2015 Tumblr bullshit. It was Rupi Kaur. It would be this chapter of incredible writing, amazing storytelling, a really interesting premise, and then it would end, and the next thing would be this cringe ass question. And I hate question : it got really tedious. I was really fucking tired of it. I'll just read you some. Question. If the shoe doesn't fit, should you change the foot? Question. Can you be good together if you don't look good together? Question. How long can you hate yourself before everyone else hates you too? And then it continues to try to play with structure in the second part, where it adds footnotes. And often the footnotes are like absolutely fucking useless. Often the footnotes were just giving me context that I didn't feel I needed. And maybe I'm missing something there. It kind of felt like I was missing something there. It was tedious. It was really tedious. Almost the whole time I was reading this, I was feeling like this would have been really good if you had just written a normal book, if you hadn't tried to do these weird structural formatting things. But then it got to the third part, and the third part brought it all home for me. I completely changed what I thought after the third part. So part 1 and 2 are telling the story of this relationship, and it leads up to this big thing that happens. And then in part 3, it's telling the story of the aftermath of what happened through a writing workshop. And let me explain that, because that makes no fucking sense. So part 3 is written out as if it's a script, and it is going through a conversation that a writing class is having while they workshop the final part of this story that is not in the story. It doesn't exist. And so they're talking about what happens in this last part, what they don't like about it, what they think should be cut, what they think should be changed, but we don't get to read it. So we're being told the story through the workshop. It's like so skilled. It's so good. I was like absolutely enthralled. I could not put it down at this last part. I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was amazing. Such an interesting choice. So unique. It's just like, I kind of felt like I had to suffer through a lot, but I didn't, because the vast majority of it was really good. I really liked the story. I really liked the writing outside of the questions. I didn't like how contemporary it was. I know this is a stupid complaint, but like talking about big dick energy and going viral on Twitter, that's too much for me. I hated that. I liked the characterization in this. The characters are very eccentric, but at the same time very moody and melodramatic. So they're quite unique, but they're also kind of subdued. And I also thought that this conveyed the language barrier between them really well, because obviously the whole thing is in English. And I like when it says like, oh, a nostril is a thing on a nose when they're talking to each other. That was great. I don't think I've ever seen that before. So some parts of this I'm like 100% 5 stars, love. Some parts I'm like 3. If any of it sounded interesting to you, you should read it, because I think you can get past the things about it that are not great and get down to like the really good writing at the base of it. Then I read Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Machado. This is exactly what I want in a short story collection. It was amazing. The first story is a retelling of The Green Ribbon that is really about kind of motherhood and women's bodies and men and children feeling owed these bodies. Then there's a story that's told as an inventory of all of the people that this woman has slept with, but it's also telling the story of like a plague that destroys the world. It's not COVID. This is written before COVID. Thank God. I don't want to read about COVID. One that I like loved. At first I started reading this, I was like, okay, this is kind of silly, but there's this long one in the middle that is told as, oh my God, I just ripped the book in half. This is a library book. I don't even feel like I put that much pressure on it. This is told through the summaries of 272 made up Law & Order SVU episodes. It's awesome. There's like doppelgangers. It's so cool. It's such a cool way to tell a story, and it's really digestible because it's just these like short little quips that are connected in like the overarching narrative, but not down at the base level. So you can just read a couple of them and like sit with it. It's just a good way to tell a story. It was awesome. This is very queer, very creepy, very gross, magical realism, truly everything that I want in a short story collection this had, and the writing was fantastic and really, really, really easy to read. And it's also very erotic, which is truly not my taste, but it was so good that I could get through it. Like the writing in the erotic scenes or the erotic stories was just good enough that it didn't really take me out of it. Typically it gets to sex and I'm like, okay, oh my God, I feel like I'm 12 again. But this, I just didn't experience that. It's just like looking back on it, it's like, okay, this was really about sex. It's also about power, and it's also about patriarchy, and it's awesome. And I'm gonna read In the Dream House. I have to. Everybody's always talking about it. It's got to be good. Here's my sticky note for it. After that, I read Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, and like, I don't know where to begin. It was so good, but it was so much. I think everything Fernanda Melchor writes is just so much. So Hurricane Season is set, I think, in a small town in Mexico, and in this town, there is a witch who is both revered and hated by the town. And this is not a spoiler, but she winds up dead. And the book is about the men who killed her. And it's told through the people near these men. There's such a sense of rage and urgency in all of Melchor's work that I've read that makes it like almost frightening to read. Like, if you are uncomfortable with anger, this book is uncomfortable. Her writing is uncomfortable. It almost feels like someone is angry at you, and that's horrible, but it's so good how she conveys it. Like, I just can't believe how good she is at conveying these really, really strong negative emotions just through the writing. It's almost nauseating, just the sentences. And then what is nauseating is the topics that she's dealing with. This is super heavy, deals with some disgusting, horrible, taboo shit that is difficult to read about. I have a hard time recommending it just because of how heavy it is and how like icky you feel when you're finished with it. There's this part that I want to talk about because I thought it was so skilled, where it's telling the story of this man who was kind of an accomplice to the crime. It's telling his story for like a long time leading up to what happened, a lot of the context. And then when it gets to the actual event, it switches very quickly, like I think within a sentence, switches to a perspective where he is the witness. And it's like told in like legal jargon. It's crazy. Like it all of a sudden you're in the courtroom and he's like relaying his statement and his lawyers are there. I was taken aback. I read it like 3 or 4 times over because it was just like incredible. It's so good. Her writing is so fucking good, but damn. Careful with this one. After that, I read Eartheater by Dolores Reyes. This is about a woman. I think it begins with her as a young woman and she grows up a little bit and she is compelled to eat dirt. And when she does, it gives her visions of dead and missing women. So this is, of course, commentary on femicide, and it's very heavy for that, especially like the young woman dealing with families who are so desperate in grief and searching for answers. It was a little bit simplistic. I don't think that there was much under the surface of this, but it's such an interesting premise to me that I just ripped through it. One sitting, couldn't put it down. It also might be that the translation is not that great. Something that I noticed in this is that sometimes people's names will be spelled wrong. Maybe not wrong. Maybe they have 2 spellings of their names, but it was very confusing to me. Sometimes it was wrong, actually. Sometimes I'm certain that it was wrong. Like it would just be 2 letters jumbled up. This needed a bit of a better editor, but don't let that sway you. If you like that crazy, ridiculous premise, the magical realism, this is great. I liked the character's like no nonsense worldview, which contrasted so much against this obsessive compulsive urge that she has to literally eat dirt. I loved this, but I wouldn't say it's like the best piece of writing ever. Up next is Shy by Max Porter. This is about a very troubled young man, I think in England, I think in the 90s. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. Usually I have notes for this, but I'm just looking at the books and remembering them. This teenager, Shy, has ended up in an institute for, or like a home for troubled young men. The whole book takes place over the course of just one night in his life, but obviously it gives a lot of context as to how he ended up there. There's a lot of shame and guilt in this book, and it was hard. As someone who was a bit troubled and a bit out of control of their own emotions and actions while I was a little bit younger than this character, this made me feel really bad. This brought up a lot of stuff that I didn't want to think about, and I had a really hard time getting through this, and I had a hard time being put in the head of a character who feels like he cannot control his emotions or his behaviors and then deeply regrets how that turns out. So in some ways I hated this. I wouldn't say this is amazing. I think that it does this thing with fonts that I just thought was corny. There's like 3 or 4 fonts. One font is the present tense, one font is the past, one font is like a voice in his head who's bullying him. What I liked about this was how it ended, which I'm not going to spoil for you. I think that the way this was set up, it was a hard thing to end. It was a hard book to finish in a way that didn't betray the character that it had set forth. And it did it well. Not my favorite book ever, but it's worth the read, I think. Next up is Salt Slow by Julia Armfield. I realized after I finished this that Julia Armfield is the woman who wrote Our Wives Under the Sea, which is a book that everybody really likes. I haven't read it yet, but I do plan on reading it at one point in my life. This is a short story collection and I loved it. It was great. It was exactly what I want. It's a short story collection with like weird, gross women, magical realism, the body horror of being pubescent, and queer relationships. There's nothing more I could have asked for from this. I loved it. I loved every story. I thought they were great. The first one is the body horror one. It's about a teenage girl who's like turning into a creature. It's awesome. There's one that's like so disgusting and amazing and horrible about a young girl or a teenage girl, I think, again, and she has a wolf for a stepsister, and the girl is the feral one. I love gross women. This had everything that I wanted. There's one where a woman's girlfriend comes back from the dead, but she's like rotting. Amazing. After that, I read Lemon, which is kind of a murder mystery, but not, and kind of a crime book, but not. So don't go into it expecting either of those things, but know that it has maybe like similar plot structure. This is about a teenage girl who gets murdered in 2002, and it's told through a few different women who were in her life at the time. Her murder is unsolved, so this is a lot about the two men who were accused of it, but eventually released. I think that it is very interesting to tell this story through women adjacent to the one who was killed. I liked how they all had very different perceptions of this girl, and I liked that she was complex. She was not like reduced to a victim. She was weird and like kind of gross, and you especially see that from her younger sister's perspective, which is, I think, the main one in this book. The translation's fine. It's like not amazing, but it's okay. There are some choices that I hated, and I found it to be just irritating. There's one perspective that is told, and it's one side of a phone conversation, and it's done so poorly. I think it could have been really interesting. It could have been done in so many different ways, and it's not. So instead of leaving anything up to the reader, it will just have the one side of the phone conversation repeat every single thing that the other side says. Like, she'll be like, oh, I went to school at so-and-so. And then she'll say, what year did I graduate, did you say? Is that right? Oh, I graduated in 2018. Who was my favorite teacher? Oh, it was yada, yada, yada. Oh, it was so annoying. And it was endless. Like, it just kept doing that over and over again. Not once did it leave you to intuit what was being said on the other line. And no one talks like that. So it just felt so fake. A lot of the dialogue in this felt really overwritten and really fake. It was fine. I kind of wanted to like it more. I think that if some things were done differently, it could have been really good. Now we're going to talk about 4 books that I literally just talked about, because these are the ugly books that I read this month for my Should You Judge a Book by Its Cover video. First up is The Pink Hotel by Liska Jacobs. This is awful, and I'm not going to get into what I think of this cover, or I'm going to get really upset like I did the first time. This is insane. It's such an insane book. So many things happen. It's such a romp. It is not well written. Not in the worst way ever. I have read writing that is much worse, with books that have much nicer covers than this. It's just like, ugh. What it is really fast-paced, except at the beginning. But other than the beginning, it's really fast-paced, and the storytelling's really great. I'll say it about this book. The storytelling's awesome, even though the story's fucking stupid. I wanted to pick this up. I was intrigued by it. I wanted to know what happened. It sets this very specific and kind of weird atmosphere that I really liked. This is about a couple who go and stay at this ultra-luxurious hotel for their honeymoon where they don't really fit in. They're invited there by the manager because he wants to hire the man of the couple for a job. While they're staying there, there's wildfires all over California. This tries to be some sort of commentary on class, and it's not. It's super fucking shallow in that regard. It builds up this tension of these people staying at this hotel where they don't really fit in with all these really rich people that have very specific etiquette, and you know that it's going to end in like some crazy shit going down. And it does. And it's absurd. And if you want to hear a bunch of spoilers about it, go watch my other video where I tell you everything that happens in this. But I want to get it out of my face. I don't want to keep looking at it. Then I read After the Sun by Jonas Eika. This was such a massive disappointment. I would have loved this if it didn't do what it did. It's a collection of short stories, which I thought were going to be interconnected, and they weren't, which is kind of my fault. But it's very weird. It's very absurdist. It's very surreal, and it doesn't do anything with that strangeness. It's just weird to be weird, and I hated that about it, because it would be like a weird story that all of a sudden at the end introduced this really, really, really weird thing, and then it would just end. The weird thing didn't mean anything. This has some fantastic writing. It's a really good translation. It has some interesting and eccentric characters, and it does have some commentary on like power and alienation and class that is done well. I just wanted more from it, and I'm so disappointed in how it ended up. Then I read My Armenian Friend by Andreï, which has the silliest cover I've ever seen. I actually love it with my whole heart, and I thought this was gonna be honestly really boring and not my taste, and I loved it. It's about two young boys living in Siberia in the 70s, I think, and one of them has just moved from Armenia, and he's this weird little boy. He has a kind of debilitating illness, and the other boy, the narrator of the story, protects him from bullies. They become close friends. The narrator is an orphan. He goes and hangs out at Varden, the Armenian boy's house, often, where he's just welcomed in by this community. This is told like retrospectively, as the narrator is an old man telling it, but he's talking about his experiences of being a 13-year-old and him like discovering who he is and what he believes about the world. It's lovely, and the writing's really good. It's a little bit writerly, a little bit dense, but I liked it. I liked that about it. I think that this is a very, very, very good writer who wrote this. Then I read Jack of Spades by Joyce Carol Oates. This is so fucking stupid. I don't know why I ever read this. I mean, I read it because it was ugly. It's so ugly. And the inside is ugly too. She's prolific, and she's been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize like a billion times. So I don't know like if she was having a bad day when she wrote this, or if she's just plastered her name onto a book that somebody else wrote. This is about a writer who has an alter ego called Jack of Spades. Typically, it's just a pen name that he uses to write like gross horror books, but it's also like the little devil on his shoulder. And a woman sues him for plagiarism. He ends up like breaking into her fucking house. There's a death. There's a couple deaths. It's a whole fucking thing. The writing is really, really, really bad. It's just like very simplistic language. Every book that I read, I'm tabbing quotes that I like, or quotes that I find interesting, because I write them down in my little books. I write them down here in my little books like this. For Jack of Spades, I think I tabbed like 3 quotes. And even on bad books, like I'm still underlining things. I'm still annotating if it's a book I own. This just had such terrible writing. I don't know. I need to try something. I think I need to try something from earlier in Joyce Carol Oates' career, because I think she's given up. I think she's written 58 books, and I think at this point in her life, she had completely given up on writing something good, and she was just throwing words down onto a page. All right, then I read Dogs of Summer. This is about 2 young girls. They're on summer vacation. They live in the Canary Islands, I think. They're 10 years old. Our narrator, Nameless, is very shy and introverted, figuring herself out. She has this very close friendship with a girl who's her age, who is much more extroverted and experienced and sure of herself. And this really puts you back in the mind frame of being a 10-year-old who's unsure of yourself. And like the dynamics, if you were really introverted, like, you know, the dynamics between you and other kids your age. I had read that this was a queer book, and it's not explicitly queer, which I really like. Maybe she's in love with her best friend, maybe she's not. You don't know, and you don't know because she doesn't know. What I don't like about this is that it uses just kind of too much, like, it's not slang, but I think it overdoes the spelling things wrong because the narrator is 10 years old. A few things will be fine, but it's just like, oh my god, okay, here's another thing that you're spelling phonetically. I just got a bit tired of it. I think if that had been done a little bit less, I would have liked it a lot more. I think if this had a little bit more plot, I would have liked it a lot more. Nothing happens. And I guess that is what it's like on summer vacation when you're 10. So maybe maybe I'm not going to complain about that. It's okay that nothing happens in this. I think that the characters are so vivid. I think that you feel everything that the narrator is feeling, and that is hard. I don't want to think about being 10 years old anymore. I'm done. I'm done with it. I'm done with prepubescent. I'm done with puberty. I'm done with being a teenager. Even though I love coming of age novels, so I don't really know why I'm saying that. This is really good for a coming of age novel. My last book of the month was Shut Up, You're Pretty. This is a collection of short stories, but they're not short stories. This is like vignettes all in one woman's life, and it's told chronologically. So don't put stories on it, because I thought this was a goddamn collection of short stories, and it wasn't. And I didn't really like that it wasn't. I don't really like this half and half thing, like trying to get the best of both worlds of a novel and of short stories, where there are a bunch of small narratives, but then also a larger story that you are supposed to be attached to. This was fine. I think that this book was really forgettable. You don't really create a connection with the main character. I think she's very detached, and so it's hard to feel her feelings. It's hard to know what she's thinking about things, how she's reacting to things. A lot of really, really traumatizing things happen to her, but this doesn't feel like a super, super heavy read like I think it should because of the content, because this narrator is so detached from her life. But I do think that this is an interesting commentary on a woman who has just sort of fallen through the cracks. It was good. It was okay. It was fine. That's it. That's the 16 books that I read this month. I'm sorry that I've talked about half of these already. I guess that's kind of what it's like to be a YouTuber. I just got monetized. Can you believe that? I'm gonna be fucking rich. No, I'm not. I feel kind of cringe about it. I feel like I'm like almost censoring myself from saying curse words because I know, like, oh my god, I could get demonetized. I don't want to have to think about that. I'm not in this for the money. I'm in it because people comment and talk to me about books, and it's crazy. I love it so much. That's the end of the video. Okay, thank you for watching. Goodbye.